An army man returns home and finds his daughter sleeping on the floor. When Captain Peter Xavier arrived home after being away for 8 months, he was impatient to see his family again. He missed them so much. He was discharged early from his current tour and will be coming home earlier than planned. He had not said anything to his wife Linda and daughter Melissa. He wanted to surprise them. He walked towards his front door with a spring in his step and a big smile on his face. He had no idea what he was about to discover. Peter opened the door and called out Linda, Melissa. "Where are you?" "Jane, Kyle." "I'm home," but his wife and stepsons didn't answer. The house was empty. It was a Saturday morning, and they should all be home. "Melissa," Peter called out one last time. "Daddy," cried a faint voice. "I'm here in the kitchen." Peter ran to the kitchen door and was surprised to see that it was locked. He turned the key and opened the door. Melissa was standing there with tears in her eyes. "Daddy," she sobbed, "I've missed you so much." Peter hugged his daughter tightly, then over her shoulder, he saw a mattress. "Melissa," he gasped, "why are you sleeping here? Why? Where are Linda and the boys?" Melissa looked frightened. "Please, Daddy," she said. "Please, it's all right." "Tell me," Peter said in a stern voice. "Were you locked up and sleeping in the kitchen?" Melissa started sobbing. "I can't tell you," she cried. "Don't you see, Daddy? You'll go away again, and I'll be all alone with them again." Peter put his arms around his daughter. "I promise you, Melissa, you have nothing to be afraid of ever again. Now, tell me what's going on." 6 months ago, Linda said Jane and Kyle were too big to be sharing a bedroom, she explained. "So she moved me out of my bedroom, and Kyle moved in. I sleep in the kitchen on this mattress." Peter was furious. When he married Linda, he treated her 2 sons from a previous relationship as his own. He believed she'd done the same for his little orphan daughter. "Where are they now?" Peter asked, "and why were you locked in?" "Linda took the boys to Florida for the weekend to celebrate Kyle's birthday," Melissa said. "So she left me some sandwiches and locked me in here because she thinks I'd steal her things." Just then, someone knocked on the kitchen door. Peter looked through the window and saw a slim, sweet-faced woman with a covered plate in her hand. "Melissa, it's Karen," she said. "Who's Karen?" Peter asked Melissa. "She's a new neighbor," Melissa said. "She's really sweet and kind. I think she suspects something because she always brings me treats." Peter fished out his keys and unlocked the kitchen door. "Hello," he said to Karen. "I'm Melissa's father." Karen looked embarrassed. "Hi," she said. "I hope you won't take it the wrong way, but I brought Melissa some hot food." "Of course not," Peter said. "Thank you for your kindness to my daughter. I've just realized what you've probably known for some time, but I'm putting things right." "I knew Melissa was left alone," Karen said. "She'd always say she couldn't open the door to anyone, but I knew something was very wrong. I was going to call social services, but I was afraid I'd just make things worse." Peter assured Karen that everything would be put to rights and thanked her again for her kindness to Melissa. Then he started thinking about how he was going to solve the problem with Linda and her sons. On Sunday afternoon, Linda and the boys arrived home to find 3 mattresses on the lawn, and on top of them were piled all of their belongings. Linda was furious. "Melissa," she screamed, "I'll get you for this." But when the door opened, it wasn't Melissa standing there. It was her husband, Peter, and he didn't look the least bit friendly. "Hello, Linda," he said calmly. "Peter," Linda gushed, "baby, what a wonderful surprise." "I think I was the one who had the biggest surprise, Linda," Peter said. "But just so you know, Melissa's back in her bedroom. You and the boys can move those mattresses into the garage, which is where you'll be living from now on." Linda saw the flinty look in Peter's eyes and knew the game was up. "I'll take you for every penny you have, Peter," she screeched. "No, you won't," Peter said calmly. "I called the police, and they saw how Melissa was living in the conditions I found her in. You try anything, and you go to jail for child abuse." Linda and her sons took their things and ran, and the last Peter heard from her was when she signed the divorce papers. A few months later, he started dating Karen, and Melissa knows that very soon she'll have a new and loving mom in her life. If you liked this one, here's another story for you. A man who was hungry and homeless saw an older lady struggling to carry her groceries. "I helped her out and carried them to her house." The next day, the grocery store owner's employee grabbed him by his shirt and brought him to the store after a woman discovered something in her bag that she didn't buy. They say there's light at the end of the tunnel, but for some people it's easier said than done. Texas-based carpenter Alfred Tyler's stories as such. When Hurricane Harvey hit Texas in 2017, it ruined more than just his home. Alfred lost his house to the catastrophic flooding, and the only person he called family, his beloved wife, Sophia, was one of among the hundreds who lost their lives. Since then, Alfred had been living on the streets, homeless and a widower. He saw no hope in living and couldn't find any job. He quit going to the church and often argued with God for making his life so miserable. But one day, God answered all his questions in the most unthinkable way. On a hot afternoon in June 2021, Alfred was wandering the street looking for some shade. He was thirsty and hungry. He dug into the pockets of his ragged pants and heard a few dimes click. He decided to save them to buy a bun or bread for dinner. Exhausted and sweating, Alfred arrived at a supermarket's parking lot. It was filled with many vehicles, so he thought nobody would find him waiting out the afternoon there. Whenever Alfred saw shoppers coming out, he walked toward them, extending his hound for arms, while some tossed a dime or two, others mostly ignored him, as if it were nothing. Alfred was hurt, but what could he possibly do? Whenever something like this happening, he'd either grin or blame God for his situation. Tired and hungry, Alfred decided to take a nap on the empty spa where he'd taken refuge for the afternoon. He'd almost dozed off when he heard something scraping on the floor a little farther away from him. "What's that noise?" he mumbled and lifted his head to see. An older woman had just exited the supermarket with a shopping cart, trying to unload her heavy bags and carry them. Alfred couldn't just wait and watch. He got up, never mind that he could smell his own sweat, and approached the wealthy-looking woman to help. "Hi there, do you need any help?" "Please give it to me, I'll help you out," he said, grabbing the shopping cart. Alfred began unloading the bags from it and looked at her again. "I can carry them for you to your house if you don't mind," he said shyly. The older woman, who was stunned by the stranger's interest in helping her out because nobody had done this to her before. She often shopped there, and most of the time she carried her bags herself and loaded them in her car. But that day she didn't take her car and had to walk home carrying the hefty baggage. After a brief thought, she asked Alfred if he was sure and told him she had no money. "I can't pay you, young man. I just spent my last time shopping." She looked at the homeless stranger from head to toe, assuming he would just walk away shouting or cursing at her for wasting his time. But Alfred's reply made her realize that not all poor people were after money. "You look like my mother, and I wouldn't charge my mother for my help," Alfred said. "Please allow me to carry these bags for you." He insisted, picking up the heavy bags. For 15 minutes or so, Alfred followed the older woman to her house with her bags. When they got there, she invited him for a cup of tea, but he refused. The stranger's kindness touched the woman's heart as she watched Alfred wave and disappear into the street. Then she checked her bag and was startled to find something she didn't remember purchasing. She examined the item and decided to track down the homeless man immediately. The woman revisited the supermarket the following day and looked around for Alfred, but he wasn't there. She walked into the store and met with the owner, asking him to find the homeless man. "Can you find him, please?" "He must have come here," she said, "and the CCTV footage should help." "Why'd you see him yesterday?" The store owner asked. "I think at around 2:00 p.m. he was in the parking lot." Pause. The store owner told the technician, "Is that him?" "Yes," the woman pointing at Alfred on the computer screen. "That's him." "Yes, that's the guy. Let's find him." The older woman said, after seeing the homeless man in the store CCTV footage. The supermarket owner sent his security guards to look for Alfred. He guesses the man lived on the same street or same town. After hours of searching platforms, bus stands, and parking lots, the men returned with Alfred, grabbing him by his shirt. When the older woman saw how they held the poor man, she became furious. "Leave him. You were told to bring him, not drag him." Alfred was frightened, had no clue what was happening. "What's happening?" "I didn't do anything." He said, his eyes filled with tears and fear. "These men found me in the bus, then and asked if I was here yesterday. When I told them I was, they grabbed me by my shirt and brought me here. I didn't do or steal anything." Alfred kept begging him to let him go. That's when the older woman came across and hugged him, while the others watched in surprise. "Mom, what are you doing?" The store owner asked her, as it turned out she was the supermarket owner's mother and wanted to meet Alfred to return that chain that had accidentally slipped into her bag. "I saw this chain, and when I opened the locket, I saw this picture. Is she your wife?" she asked Alfred. The man burst into tears and told her he thought he'd lost the only memory he had of his late wife. "I thought I'd never see it again," Alfred cried. "I looked for it yesterday, but couldn't find it." The older woman told her son Jack about Alfred's kind deed the previous day. She took him aside, and minutes later, the mother and son approached the homeless man with some good news that moved him to tears. "What did you say your name was?" Jacob asked him. "Alfred Tyler, Mr. Tyler, glad to meet you. I'm Jacob Johnson. We were looking to hire someone to help our elderly customers carry their bags. I think it'd be a good fit." "What do you think?" Alfred couldn't believe his ears. Tears gushed down his eyes as he folded his hands in gratitude and nodded his head. He was overly delighted, and for the first time since the tragedy, he thanked God for helping. Jacob handed him a uniform set and asked him to start the next day. Alfred was glad, and before leaving, he looked at the older woman to thank her. "Thank you so much. You're no different from my mother," he said in tears, "and you're no different from my son," she said, patting Alfred on his shoulder. Before leaving, he stopped to ask her for a name. "Mary, my name's Mary Johnson," she said, moving Alfred to tears once again. His late mom's name was also Mary. From that day on, Alfred, a once homeless man, the sweet fruits of his compassion. He got a good job and started going to church every Sunday. Even more, he never complained about anything or blamed God ever again. If you liked this one, here's another story for you. The maid would always make sure to see the son off before he left for work in the morning. Although she first saw it as a tradition, she now always looked at it as something more. The warning flags became too obvious for Daniel to ignore. He put up cameras and watched in terror in the shadows as she utilized his house for her own personal matters. 32-year-old businessman Daniel Evanson had high aspirations. He was a workaholic who stayed in his office all day long, perfecting business concepts for his enterprise. When he was only 25 years old, he founded his own coaching business. It was now an expanding company with over 100 people. He was, needless to say, very active. But although his career was growing, his personal life was suffering. Daniel worked in an office all his life. He was still working on finding a work-life balance. He struggled to keep up with his household as a bachelor, so he decided to hire help, or so he thought. His jaw was hanging open as he watched the screen. Daniel found her actions to be unbelievable. Anger swept through him, sending his heart racing. Daniel had no idea Sarah had other goals when he recruited her to be his housekeeper. Although she appeared innocent and was young and attractive, she wasn't. At first, her work was impeccable, and he enjoyed returning home to a tiny home. She also left him some flowers in the house. He immediately became accustomed to and enjoyed seeing it because it was a polished touch. He had no idea that the flowers were much more than just a fancy touch. They were a clear sign of what was to come, serving as a warning. Sarah would arrive at Daniel's house soon before he left for work each morning, greeting him there. She was scheduled to leave by lunchtime and would clean while he was gone. Weeks went by without any issues. However, Daniel quickly started to notice an oddity. The house appeared to have gotten less clean as time went on. The floor frequently appeared to have not even been vacuumed, but the peculiar odor that started to linger was what truly started to annoy Daniel. He also observed a significant rise in his electricity costs since she began working for him. He had an insight. Daniel believed that placing covert cameras all around his home would be the best method to learn what she was up to. After all, he paid her extremely lavishly and anticipated that her work would be completed. Daniel, however, was not at all ready for what his camera would record. As usual, Daniel greeted Sarah in the morning and left for work. He logged into a security camera system once he arrived at his office. Everything seemed to be normal so far. He put his phone away and focused on his task. He logged back into the security cameras after the workday was over and was astonished to find her just about to leave the house at that point. She ought to have been done long ago. He stood up from his chair, pressed play, and went back to the beginning of the day. He sped up the video and observed Sarah moving through the house, picking up objects and wiping down counters. She suddenly started acting in a wholly strange manner. As Daniel took in the strange scene, his heart sank. The whole thing was absurd. Driving home, Daniel was enraged. He couldn't believe he'd let someone of that kind to stay in his home for so long. He emailed her as soon as he got home. He sent her the video and these straightforward messages: "You're fired." He made the decision not to file a lawsuit, but someone else might have. What was it he saw? Daniel observed his housekeeper removing her clothing and tossing them in the washer. She moved through the house in her undies to get to his bedroom. She started trying on his clothes and danced around his room. As Daniel stared in disbelief, she poured his cologne on herself as she sat on his bed, but it didn't end there. She loaded his clothing into the washer after washing her own. She slipped one of his t-shirts inside his luggage and Daniel watched. He believed he had lost 2 objects, but then remembered he had no doubts that she had taken them. Although Daniel fired her, he had one unresolved concern. It became apparent that she was fixating on him. He questioned whether she would return or start stalking him. He preserved the outdoor cameras that were already there and added additional ones inside. He came to the conclusion that she understood not to exceed her limits after a few weeks of no communication. She was fortunate that he initially refrained from filing a lawsuit, but not everyone supported his choice. Online, Daniel posted his narrative. He showed clips from their video and urged consumers to thoroughly screen their housekeepers. People urged him to file charges after they heard the recording and expressed their shock. One commenter said she could do this to someone else if you don't pursue legal action. What do you think, though? In another story, house caught on camera rummaging through guests' belongings. A video that was uploaded to YouTube by a former hotel guest has generated a conversation on the appropriate and inappropriate behaviors that housekeepers at hotels should and should not be engaging in when cleaning guest rooms. The laptop camera of a hotel visitor in the United States on November 5th was used to record a maid going through the belongings of a guest and a video with the title Privacy at a brand-named hotel. The video was shot in the hotel. The housekeeper is responsible for everything, including examining video games, a video game system, a video game cartridge, as well as handling electronic devices such as laptops and tablets. A user on YouTube by the name of Vince Stravic said, "This took place on November 5th, 2014. I was staying at a well-known hotel, and while I was there, I spread out all my belongings in the room where I was sleeping. However, as of right now, put your belongings somewhere out of sight, like the trunk of a car, or at the very least, make sure they're not visible." The user mentions that individuals can ask questions of him on Twitter by using the hashtag #AskStravics. The video doesn't make it entirely obvious whether or not the cleaner is in fact attempting to access the guest computer at the time he suggests doing so. Although it appears as though she is typing on the laptop, you're unable to actually see her doing so. Additionally, it's very obvious that she's caressing the display of the tablet. As a direct result of the video, the problem of invasion of privacy has been brought to the forefront. The fact that the video has already racked up more than 10 million views since it was uploaded on November 8th is sufficient evidence to suggest that this is a topic that's currently receiving a lot of attention. It's very evident that housekeepers will look at goods that are out in the open to determine if they need to be thrown away or set aside. But what exactly is considered to be overstepping the line? A guest at a hotel is only seldom informed about the hotel's housekeeping practices and policies. Should a hotel be more forthcoming about this in order to clear up any misunderstandings? Is this an extreme reaction, or is there something here that merits investigation? These are all questions that depend on the extent of the security breach, as well as the specifics of each particular guest, which makes it difficult to provide definitive answers to these queries. It's possible that hotels should explain their housekeeping policies to guests, just in case someone feels caught off guard, or perhaps the guests ought to be asked directly if they're bothered by the situation. In any case, this film has stirred up quite a controversy, and considering that privacy is a matter that's often treated with great sensitivity, it's quite unlikely that people would simply forget about this issue. In another case, maid captured on CCTV, dipping child's hand in boiling water. These horrifying images show the horrific injuries that a young child sustained as a result of an incident in which the family's housekeeper is accused of setting fire to the child. Last week, the girl who was 16 months old with burns in second degree required to be treated at a hospital. The child's housekeeper, who was 30 years old and worked for the family, is accused by police of repeatedly submerging the child's hand in water that was boiling on the stove. The woman was taken into custody in Singapore at this time, according to reports from local media. The maid's acquaintances encouraged her to carry out the attack on the child in order to gain permission for her to return to her native Myanmar, also known as Burma, which is located in Southeast Asia. Reportedly, the child's mother, Amy Lowe, who's 40 years old, watched the alleged act on CCTV before Mrs. Lowe and her partner left for work the previous week. Both of their children, an infant and an 8-year-old girl, were entrusted to the care of the housemaid. It stated that the oldest child called her father to inform him that her younger sister had sustained serious injuries. The maid initially explained to the parents that the child had burned themselves on a hot cooking pot because she'd not been able to stop her in time. According to the local media, The parents were taken aback when the maid packed her belongings and insisted on going back to her employment agency. Despite the fact that they had previously assured the housekeeper that they trusted her and did not hold anything against her. According to the reports, the woman's employment agency has consented to accept her back and would also reimburse the family for the money they paid to pay the housekeeper's loan. The pre-employment charges that the maid owes to the agency during the first few months of employment are covered by the loan, which is also known as a placement fee, and it's normally withdrawn from the maid's first salary payment. The suspect is supposed to appear in court soon to hear whether or not charges will be laid. The investigation into the incident on Singapore is still ongoing, and there are no updates at this time. I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, please give it a thumbs up and consider sharing it with someone you think might find it interesting. I'll see you in the next video.